Pinduoduo exceeded second quarter sales projections this past week as its discount e-commerce platform drew price-conscious Chinese clients, and its international shopping site, Temu, continued to grow. Now, if we scroll out to the monthly chart, we can see price hit a bottom at the monthly buy level at $36. On its way up, came close to a daily supplies level at 110 before collapsing to the weekly buyers level at 165. Before we continue with the analysis, let's get into the details from their second quarter earnings.
George Sillis is with us, senior markets correspondent. We were doing a preview yesterday of Pinduoduo, today jumping higher after its quarterly report. Positive comments from Goldman Sachs. Tell us about that.
Well, Nicole, yesterday when they reported earnings, they had pretty much a blockbuster quarter relative to the same quarter last year. But Pinduoduo is receiving a massive number of upgrades yesterday and a continuation today with, for instance, Goldman Sachs raising their target to $129 from $99, and even JP Morgan increased their price target to $120. Both of these analyst firms have respective buys or outperform ratings on the stock. And if you look at the company as a whole and their business model, it's really effectively a value-orientated e-commerce company. But the focal point for Pinduoduo is basically agricultural products, food products, and general merchandise. So we're talking about more consumer staple-orientated products versus discretionary products. And at the end of the day, they have a very efficient ecosystem that allows more competition and, of course, building team-based networks to buy bulk foods amongst users. And it's really a unique business model. It competes not necessarily with Alibaba or JD in the retail space, but they have a more focused point or a market that's associated with more of agricultural products and food. And I think if you think about the nature of, the government in China, they seem to be more apt to take on technology firms. I think from a political standpoint, they tend to stay away from firms that actually help the common good of people to procure and secure more efficient food supplies. I think that's one of the reasons why Pinduoduo has been very successful in the last year, considering if you look at the stock relative to the broader Chinese market, this stock has outperformed the entire market. It's outperformed larger e-commerce players that everyone's familiar with, like JD and Alibaba, and other technology companies like Baidu.
Understood. So with that, just this week alone, on the heels of the earnings, you saw that gap higher. I know you saw it, and it's up 20%, and it's only Wednesday morning. It's up 20% this week. So now what? How do you go about an example trade here?
Yeah, well, looking at the stock too, Nicole, I failed to mention, I'll briefly mention this, but it's a very profitable company. Net income margin is 25% of sales, and if you compare that to Alibaba at around 9% and Amazon at 2.5%, they're a remarkably profitable company. So with that said, based on the chart action, we actually see around $90 as the previous resistance area going back to late July, or about 30 days ago. It breached that. And so with that said, we can potentially see a gap and go here where we see a gap and continuation pattern. So what we can do is you could either buy shares. If you buy 100 shares, it costs you about $9,500. If you buy just call options, $700. So I thought one way we can actually buy a call option in a cheap capacity is buying what's called a collared combo or a synthetic. So effectively what we're going to do is go out to October and buy the $95 call option, and we'll simultaneously sell the $95 put option. So altogether, we're using that put option to help finance the acquisition of the call option. And earlier today, you could have bought that for about $1 a share or $100 a contract. So effectively, the break even here is $96. But one of the things you have to keep in mind is by putting on this synthetic, one, there's unlimited profit potential. But two, in case the stock does fall between now and October below the $95, you have to be willing and able to take ownership of 100 shares at $95, but your cost basis is going to be $96 because you're outlaying $1 for that extra call. So if you think it's going to hold 95 or higher between now and October, this is a cheap way to play a bullish continuation.
Yeah, what's interesting is our last guest was just talking about some of the most crowded trades this August, the long big tech trade, 60%, and the short China equities trade, 14%. Long Japan, What do you think of that? I mean, because his idea too was as China starts to put some stimulus in, things could really turn around. But short China equities trade is a big one.
I think the technology space in China is still challenged right now, Nicole, and that's why I brought up earlier for Pinduoduo as a company. I think from the standpoint of regulation and government sanctions and some of the crackdowns associated with that, it seems to be one of these companies that Chinese government seems to stay away from because, like I said, it really focuses more on the agricultural front and food, and they don't want to necessarily create some political issues associated with being able to procure cheap sources of food. So I think this is an interesting company, and I think this is one of the reasons why there's been such a divergence away from this company relative to the other Chinese equities.
Right, and that's the point, whether or not China's administration, the regulators there, whether or not they over-regulate some of their companies to the point that they don't get to succeed as well because they're too busy, squashing them a bit. Okay, George Sillis, great to see you. Thank you.
And as you can see on the weekly level, price has surged, gaps higher and surges higher. Now again, you do have this daily sellers level at 110. It's still fresh, meaning there are plenty of unfilled sell orders. Let's go down to the level so you can see it a bit more. This little pivot here gives you an indication that there are definitely sellers in this area, as price could not even get to the zone before price collapsed, roughly $45. So let's look at the zone a bit more on the daily chart. So I'm going to go to the left, and it's not really obvious, but you have a drop in price, many basing candles, and then a drop. Price returns, comes into the zone, penetrates the zone roughly 50%, pulls away, tries to return, but they're just, the sellers are in control, and then price collapses. Again, price formed a weekly buyer's level at $65. Price rose, tried to come into the zone but couldn't because the sellers they're just too great of an imbalance between sellers and buyers. Price collapses, returns to the buyer's level at the weekly $65 level, and then pulls away. Now the question is there going to be enough momentum to finally breach and close above the daily sellers level at 110? Don't really know. However, I would say that the bulk of the liquidity to reverse price is further up, and that's going to be at the monthly sell zone at 135. So if you were to divide this chart up into, let's say, fifths, 1, 2, 3. We'll just keep it at quadrants. One, two, three, four. Okay. Bear with me. All right. So if I was to break this chart into quadrants, down here is going to be cheap, very cheap. Let's just do this here. Very cheap. This level here is going to be cheap. All right. We're going to say this quadrant here is going to be expensive. And this quadrant above here is going to be very expensive. Just to keep it simple. So you can see why price did pull back near the zone, because you are entering that expensive, very expensive area. You can see why price resumed higher, because you were in still that cheap quadrant. So don't know what's going to happen when price enters the zone. there is liquidity, more liquidity up at the monthly sell zone again at 135, which can potentially reverse price. But we'll see what happens over the next several weeks and months. Thanks for watching. Subscribe. Please like the video.